Hey everyone, this is David Brown with the migration update for April 8th, 2025 from the Derby Hill Hawkwatch. As expected, the weather was unfavorable today with a very strong northwesterly wind and lake effect snow, and the temperatures were below freezing for the entire day, so the Hawkwatch was not conducted. But that doesn't mean it wasn't a good day to be out birding at Derby Hill, because in addition to being a world-class hawk watching site, it's also a great lake watching spot. People go out in the fall, especially late October and November, when there's northwesterly winds, and get a lot of rarities, including Jaegers. It's a good spot to get things like black-legged kittiwake, possibly something like a Sabin's gull, and there have even been some rarer birds over the years, such as northern gannet and even a short-tailed shearwater. And if it's that good in the fall, I was willing to take a chance and see what the spring held. I had some great looks today. The northwesterly winds were keeping the birds right along the lake shore, and being up on the bluff, most birds were at eye level or below. Here we have a large dark sea duck with white secondary patches. This is a white-winged scoter. I'm certainly no gull expert, but I do enjoy looking at them, so I'll try my best in this video to explain what I saw today. We have two gull species that we're seeing in large numbers this time of year, and as adults, they both have a similar shade of gray to the back and wings. Here's the larger of the two. This is an adult American herring gull. Notice that medium gray color, and then it goes into a black color for the wingtips, and we do see some white spots on the outer primary. Also notice on the bill of the adult herring gulls, we don't have a black ring like we'll see on the ring-billed gulls, but rather we just have a red dot. The most common ducks that were around today were red-breasted mergansers. Here we have a gull that's a darker shade of gray than we saw on that herring gull. So this is one of the black-backed gulls. And we notice it's not a super dark gray color either. And we also see some streaking to the head as this bird is still mostly in non-breeding plumage. This is a lesser black-backed gull. Here we have the classic gull that most people are probably the most familiar with. This is an adult ring-billed gull. Again, notice that shade of gray is pretty much the same as it was on the herring gull and very similar pattern to the wingtips as well. But notice on the ring-billed gulls, you have a black ring on the bill. Here we have a bird that has very pointed wings and a black cap to the head and a large orange bill. This is not a gull, but rather this is a tern, and it is the largest species of tern in the world. This is the Caspian tern. Here we have another lesser black-backed gull, my third of the morning, which is actually the most that's ever been reported from the Derby Hill North Lookout, so I was happy for that. And one way you can tell the immature lesser black-backed gull from the immature herring gull is by looking at the inner primaries. And you'll see on this bird, they're slightly paler than the outer primaries, but not significantly paler compared to the herring gull, where these feathers here on the inner primaries will be significantly paler. Here we have a flock of small gulls, even smaller than the ring-billed gulls. And on these, we see kind of a distinctive pattern to the upper side, where it has that same medium gray that we saw on the ring-billed gulls and herring gulls. But as you get to the outer wing, it becomes bright white, and then the tips of the outer primaries have black, so you get sort of a black line here to the trailing edge of the wings. And you can see some of them still have pale heads, but others have already molted into the breeding plumage and have black heads. This is a flock of Bonaparte's gulls. Here's a very lousy photo of a tree swallow, but I wanted to include it just so I could mention that today I was seeing some small flocks of tree swallows migrating west into the wind, just like the gulls were, and that the swallows were down all the way on the water. They were staying as low as possible. I guess that was helping them fight into the wind. In the morning, I had 25 species. After a few hours, the snow was getting heavier and I wanted to warm up, so I came back inside and made a nice hawkwatcher's brunch and got a few things done around the house. But the birds in the lake are irresistible, so once the snow let up, I went back out for a few more hours in the afternoon. There's some really interesting looking gulls this time of year. Here we have an immature herring gull, and notice those pale inner primaries that I talked about when we were looking at the lesser black-backed gull. And this bird's kind of funny because it has really immature looking wings, but if you look at this section of the bird, kind of the head and the back, it looks almost like an adult. But of course, it still has the dark tip to the tail, and the bill is different than the adult bill. You'll notice that this immature herring gull has a dark tip plus the red dot. Here we have another Bonaparte's gull, and that gives us a better look at that wing pattern where, again, you have the medium gray and then the brighter white to the outer wing and then that black trailing edge to the outer primaries. You can see this one's starting to molt into the dark head, and Bonaparte's gulls have small black bills, and we have a nice look here at some orange legs. Sometimes the legs look more pinkish on them as well. And this bird is kind of running on the water almost and feeding, and there were 3 of them together, and I got a cool cell phone video of them down low on the water feeding and flying slowly into the wind. Here we have sort of the typical large brown gull that we're seeing this time of year. This is a first cycle herring gull. Here we have a gull that's very clean looking overall. We see that plain kind of medium gray color to the top of the wing, going to the black as we get to the outer wing and the white mirrors as we get to the outer primary. So this is an adult gull. And looking at the bill, we see a yellow bill with a single black ring. This is an adult ring-billed gull. Here's another gull that was flying with it and the same size. Again, on this bird, we see that medium gray back, but as we get to the outer wing, it's a little bit messier looking. There's more extensive black, and we don't have that white on the outer primary feathers. So this is an immature, not an adult. And also looking at the bill, instead of that clean ring, it's almost like the entire tip. Maybe there's a little bit of tip that is yellow, but it's definitely a thicker ring than you would see on the adult. And we can also make out just a tiny bit of black on the tail as well. So this is a second cycle ring-billed gull. And to complete all the age classes, here we have the first cycle ring-billed gull. You can see that the back of the bird has molted into that typical medium gray color, but otherwise the wings are still that sort of first year appearance overall. A lot of browns and whites and just a very different pattern that you see on the older ages. And if we look at the bill of this bird, we'd see that it's pretty much a thick dark tip, not rather than just a single ring like we would see on the adult. And you have a black tip to the tail as well. Here's something that can be very confusing. Here we have a gull that looks very similar in overall plumage to that previous first cycle ring-billed gull we'd looked at, but this is actually a second cycle herring gull. And let me flip back to that ring-billed gull for a second. And here's the herring gull again. You can just see overall they're very similar because they have that medium gray back and they have sort of the immature brownish looking wings. You can see on the ring-billed here, it has more white highlights throughout the wings that you don't really see on the darker wings of the herring gull. And also looking at the bill, the ring-billed gull here has a black tip to the bill, whereas the herring gull has a black tip, but we also see a little bit of a red dot that helps distinguish them as well. But it can be a very difficult thing to pick out just from at first glance because they do have kind of the similar overall pattern. So just be aware that there's 2 different species of 2 different ages that look very similar. This is the ring-billed gull coming out of its first winter, and this is the herring gull coming out of its second winter. Here we have a nice topside look at another adult Bonaparte's gull. And did you know that Bonaparte's gulls nest in trees? The other day at the Hawkwatch, someone was asking if common loons press their feet together when they migrate, and I was happy to get this nice low flyover and capture it as it was going away and see that yes, they do kind of cross their feet and press them together when they're flying. So maybe they're more aerodynamic that way. Here we have a group of immature herring gulls together, and the easiest way to know that is by looking at these first cycle birds that are dark underneath. When we're seeing birds that look like this, those are going to be herring gulls. So it looks to me like all of these are going to be first cycle birds, except maybe this one here in the middle, which is a second cycle like we just looked at in comparison to the ring-billed gull. Here we have a very clean looking gull. We see the white here in the outer primaries, and we see a yellow bill with just a single red dot. This is an adult herring gull. A lot of gull identification depends on the shade of gray, but that can vary depending on the lighting and how you process your photos, so that can be hard to judge. But one of the best ways is when you have it in comparison to other known birds. So the 2 birds on the right here are ring-billed gulls, and we can tell that this bird on the left is slightly larger and definitely a darker shade of gray. This bird on the left is an adult lesser black-backed gull. And here we have a closer look at that adult lesser black-backed gull. We can see it's kind of a dark medium gray. It's not as dark as a great black-backed gull would be, and also the bill is not as thick as a great black-backed gull would have. Plus, in comparison to ring-billed gulls, a great black-backed gull would look huge because they're the largest gull in the world. They're much larger than herring gulls even, whereas lesser black-backed gulls are usually around the same size or even slightly smaller than herring gulls. Here we have a flock of 20 ducks that flew by. If we look at this one in the lead, that's a male. We see kind of a brown head and a whitish neck and a very long tail that's pointed because these are northern pintails. Every time I think I'm beginning to understand gull identification, I see something that throws me for a loop. So here we have a bird that to my eye looks like a typical herring gull coming out of its first winter, except in comparison to all of the other herring gulls I was seeing of this same age, it looks like this one has already molted all of these feathers, so it's kind of got the more adult-looking mantle to it compared to the very streaky one that the other first cycle birds are showing. So I think maybe this bird's just a little bit ahead in its molt schedule. With all the birds on the move today, I thought I would see more of these, but actually this was the only double-crested cormorant of the day. And as we got close to sunset, it actually started to clear up a little bit, so we had a nice evening, but too little too late for the hawks. In the afternoon, I had 23 species. Taking a look at the forecast for tomorrow, it's looking partly to mostly cloudy with the high around 37 and winds west-northwest at 10 to 20 miles per hour, so it'll be a south lookout day, maybe a hiding in the car south lookout day, but actually we may end up with some migration. It's not a terrible wind. I bet some turkey vultures will be on the move and probably small numbers of other raptors, though the flight may be spread out, so I don't know how good of a look we'll get at things, but won't be the worst day ever. For Thursday, it's looking cloudy with periods of rain later in the day and a high in the mid-40s, winds east-southeast at 10 to 15 miles per hour. So really, it's a pretty good wind direction. It's the type of day that we've gotten good flights of sharpshins down low recently. And we'll just have to see what the timing of the precipitation ends up being. But if the rain holds off until the afternoon, I'd imagine it will get a somewhat decent flight for the morning. The temperature is not really getting that high overall, only the mid-40s, but I think it's starting below freezing. So it really will be a 20-degree temperature swing throughout the morning. And for Friday, it's looking cloudy with showers with a high up around 50 and east-southeast winds at 10 to 15 miles per hour. So good winds again, but we'll just have to see what ends up happening with that precipitation. All right, well, it was nice to have a day off from the Hawkwatch today for some rest and recovery. At least as much rest and recovery as you can get while standing out in the cold lake watching for 4 hours. But I enjoyed seeing all of those gulls go by, and I hope I didn't butcher gull identification too badly in this video. You can correct me if I made any mistakes. And looks like we'll have some southerly winds coming up later this week, so maybe we'll get a bit of a flight on those days. And then really as we get into next week, probably the next time we have southerly winds, we'll start getting the first broad-winged hawks of the season. So that'll be kind of a transition period in the season. And then really only will be a couple weeks until we get the really big numbers of broadwings. So I know everyone's looking forward to that. So I hope to see you out soon at the Derby Hill Hawkwatch. From Lyco Birds, this is David Brown. Thanks for watching.